Critical Blast, where pop culture gets blasted.
And welcome, Critical Blast listeners, to another episode of the Critical Podblast. I'm your host, R.J. Carter, and with us tonight we have David J. Pedersen, the man behind all the angst. David, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing really well. Thank you for having me on.
Now, you've been doing angst for quite some time, and for people who are not familiar with the series, get familiar with the series. I've read all of them so far, and I'm looking forward to reading the next one, which I'm not going to give the title away just yet. But if you like the classic medieval fantasy stories, I was a big fan of the Dragonlance Chronicles with Weiss and Hickman writing it, and it's exactly like that, with the same sense of adventure mixed with the same sense of humor. But what were you thinking when you sat down to do the very first angst novel? I mean, where were you getting inspiration from and deciding, I'm going to do this writing thing?
Well, so, like, back in 2008, I've always wanted to write a book. Ever since I was a kid. And back in 2008, I had this idea percolating, and I was a little disgruntled with my job and kind of felt like I was meant for something different or something better than what I was doing at the time. And, I read a lot of fantasies growing up. Fantasy was my genre. The Dragonlance Chronicles that you referred to, the Xanth books, the David Eddings books, and books that you enjoyed throughout the whole story and then missed the characters when they were done. And those were always my favorite. And so I read those fantasies growing up, and I kind of wanted to do something similar. But at the same time, books reflect who you are, very much so. And for me, getting close to 40 at the time, and coming up to that midlife crisis age, it was timely, and it all kind of came together.
Now, it's funny that you say that it reflected you in the book, because we've met, and as I read the book and became familiar with the characters of Angst and his wife Heather, I absolutely saw David and Angie Pedersen in this entire setup. And I've even spoken with Angie about this convention. It's like, exactly how much angst is David? And she's like, oh, more than you can admit.
Well, and it's funny, I've had friends say that when they read the book, they hear my voice when they read it, and I apologize for that. But it's like I'm reading it out loud to them. And I think that even though the main character draws some similarities for me, the whole book is a reflection of who I am. There's bits and pieces of all the characters, and the way the story is told that is, if you spent, the best example I've gotten is a really close friend of mine from high school said, reading Angst was like spending an evening talking to you.
Well, it's funny that you say that it's your voice that people are hearing, because as of very recently now, they can hear a different voice in all of Angst, because you have the audiobook and you have a special actor who's taking care of the reading chores on that.
Yeah, this has been a really exciting week. Yesterday, the audiobook landed and became live on retail for iTunes and Amazon and Audible. I've been asked to do an Angst audiobook since it came out in 2010, and it's just, it's not only time, but they're very expensive to produce, and I wanted to do it right. You could do it on the cheap, and maybe you'd get lucky with the right voice actor, but I haven't had luck is not always in my pocket, so I kind of figure I just have to work hard to get what I want, and so I finally did an Indiegogo, and had, as people were contributing, I felt comfortable that there was going to be enough that between what was contributed, and what what I could pitch in myself, that I could go ahead and do auditions. And put out a request for auditions, and within 24 hours, I had gotten like 10. And one of them, a couple of them were really good. One of them really stood out, and I looked at the name of the person. I was like, that sounds familiar. And of course, I looked him up on IMDb, and the actor's name is Michael Troutman. He's a very well-recognized British actor. He's been on a lot of TV shows and movies. done a lot on the BBC, and his father was Patrick Troughton, the second Doctor Who. And I was fanboying. I'm like, he auditioned for my audiobook, it's done. And it was so good. It wasn't just that it was him, it was so good. And a couple weeks ago, he uploaded the final version of the audiobook, and I got to preview it as a part of the review process. Oh my gosh. I mean, it's the movie that I've wanted to be made without actually having a movie, you know?
Well, that would be the next step, though, wouldn't it, now that you've got...
I need a bigger Indiegogo.
Well, hey, if they can do Veronica Mars on Kickstarter, I'm sure we can get an Angst movie put together. But I have just recently started listening to that myself. Started this morning on my drive into work. That's 12 hours. Not the drive to work, but if I were to listen to the entire book, that'd be one hell of a commute.
That's a commute, man.
Yeah. But it was very refreshing to finally go back to the beginning and re-meet Angst and Heather and Dallo and Rose and just everybody. And it was funny because I got as far as the first meeting with Tori, and it mentioned her black hair, and I'm like, oh, I totally missed that the first time because I've seen her as a blonde through the last 5 books. Now I've got to repaint my entire mental movie.
And my wife says the same thing. She tells me that I'm wrong about Victoria's hair, and that it is supposed to be blonde and not black. And there's a reason that it goes back and forth that I explain a little bit in book 5. Yeah, that audiobook. So I was traveling for business, and I was invited to dinner that night that it arrived, and I'm like, nope, I'm eating pizza in my hotel room and listening. I just sat there in my hotel room and listening and smiling and laughing the whole time. There are characters like, pretty soon you'll hear how much of the chapter with Victoria have you listened to?
He hasn't figured out who she is yet.
Okay, but he did his impersonation.
Absolutely, yes. Rolling the R's.
Oh my gosh, when the Michael Troughton got to that part and I was listening, I'm like, oh, I bet he hated me. But I was laughing so hard because Angst impersonates the Queen in that scene, and it is not pretty.
Well, what got me was in the first chapter when Troughton let me know that there are Germans living in Unsel.
You know, and that was his take. And that was different than how I would have done it, but it was okay. I mean, I enjoyed it. And there were a few things like that, where he did the voice completely different than I would have expected, mostly for side characters.
Well, it's hard to keep all the voices straight, because there are quite a cast in this.
Yeah, absolutely. And he does a great job of keeping them separate. I have no complaints with the fact that he did it differently than I had in my head. I mean, who can read your mind? It's just like the pronunciation of some things. I did provide him a vocabulary list, but there are some things that he's like, I had to pronounce this way because I'm British. That's how we say it. I'm like, all right, I'm good with that. It's kind of like how different artists draw Batman, right? I mean, some draw him with long pointy ears, and some, stubby pointy ears, and no yellow on the chest piece logo, and everybody's got their own impression of what that character should look like. And I kind of look at actors the same way. There are some word choices that he used that were a little bit different than what was actually written, and it worked perfectly for his dialogue, and I just loved it.
Well, of course, now everyone's going to want to know, before they've even finished listening to the first book, is will he be doing the second book?
Absolutely. Like I said, it was a little bit expensive. So, and that's not anything against him. He's an exceptional actor, and just after you listen to the performance, you'll be like, oh yeah, no, he deserves everything. But based on sales, I mean, if sales go well, and they already seem to, and the feedback is good, Michael has generously agreed to do the next book and the rest of them. And he sent me some really nice messages about how much he enjoyed the book and the world that I had created.
Jim Day, get your heart out, because we got a new up and comer. So, this isn't the only angst news, though. Your audiobook is
No.
something else is coming now.
Yeah, actually, I finished it today. And the 5th Angst novel is complete, and all the edits are done, and I sent it off to my advanced review team just around lunchtime today. So it is in their hands. I've seen that a number of them have downloaded copies already, and they're reading through it to see if they've got any last-minute things to call out before it gets published.
That's awesome. Now, this is the 5th book?
Yes, this will be the last book in this series of Angst books.
Use that word.
Well, and I have always intended this to be a 5-book series. It kind of harkens back to the David Eddings Bulgarian series, where he had written 5 and then basically wrote that same series again as the Malorian series, and I loved both of them. And I'm like, I'll do a series of 5 books, and then we'll see how it goes. And if people really like the characters and miss them, after a short break of when I can write other stuff, then I'll go back and revisit those characters. And without giving anything away, I think readers will see where the story could go if I wanted to continue writing it, even though this is the definitive end of the series.
All right, so it's going to be based on how the series is going. It's been 4 books. It's been a number of years. How has the series been going? What's been the reception?
Oh, it's been good. I mean, every once in a while somebody, I watch reviews on Goodreads and Amazon because, the positive feedback encourages me to keep writing. And if I get good negative feedback where somebody says, gosh, I wish you would have dove deeper into this character, I can use that to become a better writer, and I'm happy to. But once in a while you get somebody that just, it doesn't click with it all, and a good example is a woman who had said, I couldn't get into this book, and gave it 1 star, and she was a huge fan of the Twilight series, which is, completely different than, my fantasy series. And so, but that's the exception of the rule. Yeah. Across Amazon and Goodreads for all of my books, I've got about 250 reviews, and they average a little bit higher than 4.5 stars. So I feel pretty good about that. It encourages me to keep going. But even more so is I go to a lot of science fiction, fantasy, comic book conventions, and the personal reactions I get from people. I get some folks that a woman came up to me at Planet Comic-Con last year and said, well, I needed to get the 4th book because, this is the only thing my husband asked me to come and get. And, you get stuff like that that's very touching. So it's been worth the effort. It really has.
And for anybody who hasn't seen your booth at any of the conventions you've gone to, that is quite a setup you have there. I mean, you really put time and effort and thought into making this look not like a table at a convention where some guy's sitting with a stack of books, but it's the Angst store.
Thanks. Yeah, I have. So I was in sales for the first 10 years of my life out of college, and I worked a lot of shows in a completely different industry. And I had a lot of experience with that. There's some things that I like to do. I like to be at eye level with people, but I don't like to stand all day. So we got, chairs that sit high enough that we can talk to people. And the artist that I have, the cover artist, I totally lucked out with. So, I've converted some of those covers into some nice banners, which is a pretty common thing to do. But then I got a kind of a nifty display that you can see on my Facebook page, for con pictures. It's kind of a triangular slat-board display that, it puts everything vertical so you can fit more on there. And I think people are drawn to it because it's not just books on the table.
Exactly. It's very much, it's almost like a spinner rack, and if you're at a convention, those things will just kind of drag at you for the sheer nostalgia of it.
Indeed.
Now, as much acclamation as you've been getting for Angst, you took a break from Angst last year, and I think you wrote a little short story that well, I know you wrote a little short story. What I think is that you've gotten more acclamation and more accreditation for that story than you might have gotten for all of Angst. And that was the young adult or young reader's book, CLOD Makes a Friend. Now, where did you come up with that idea?
Well, a lot of different places. So, CLOD Makes a Friend is completely different than Angst. It takes place in a different universe. It's about a kid who gets bullied and how he deals with it. It starts out where he's 9 years old, and more than anything, he just wants a friend. And so they're so poor, all they've got is clay in the house, and his mom collects clay for him to play with until it goes, until it's gone, and then she does it again. Well, he makes a little doll out of clay, and she comes to life and introduces herself as Ada, but then she doesn't last very long. And each chapter is a different year of his life. As he gets better at sculpting her, she lasts longer, and they become better friends and get in a lot of trouble. And it's been very interesting because I actually don't sell a lot of those books online, but when I go to a con and tell people about it, they're hungry to read it. And kind of a neat thing happened. A school in Independence, Missouri, Randall Elementary, one of the teachers stopped by and picked up a copy, and she loved it so much that they brought in, I think, 50 copies for their entire 5th grade class, and I got to come out and see the kids, and they made it a part of their year-end project, where they did little movie previews based on the book, which were just fabulous. They're all little claymation and so well thought out. And this year, that school is going to have their 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade classes all read the book because they feel that there's enough life lessons in there that it can benefit the kids.
It absolutely does. It's a very powerful anti-bullying message, self-esteem build up in there. And I know that it's a different universe than Angst, but still I saw CLOD and Angst as kind of the same person, only insofar that a lot of their being bullied was because they had a magic that was misunderstood or not accepted in society. And that was the basis for each of their put-upons.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can relate to that. I'm short and stubby. I got picked on a little bit in grade school, and then got to the point in middle school where I didn't care anymore and moved on. But I understood the hurt that comes with that bullying, and it's gotten so worse today. I mean, it's so much easier for people to hide behind computers and say mean things to other people that I tried to make it kind of like that, where the kid's main nemesis, CLOD's main nemesis in the book is his teacher, Lorna Dugan, and I wanted to create a person that is untouchable, unreachable. I mean, it's his teacher, and I tried to keep him in that position for the most part throughout the story, because that made me think of how things are with the internet today, where people can bully and get bullied without ever seeing or knowing the person that's being mean.
How did the teachers respond to the idea that the bully in the book was actually a teacher?
Surprisingly well. I was actually worried about that because, I mean, I love teachers. I've had some incredible teachers, but, you got to have a bad guy somewhere. And not just like with any profession, not everybody is going to be the good guy, unfortunately. It is possible to have a bad teacher. It's kind of like the old joke, and gosh, I can't think it was Stephen Wright who said, right now somebody's going to the worst doctor in the world. And, not that I have anything against doctors, but there is one out there that has to be the worst. So, so the teacher was very cool with it.
All right, well, that is one that a lot of people are reading right now, and we're happy about that. You also have a short story that not a lot of people have heard of yet, and I'm very proud to be featured in the same book with you on that one, and that is the Critical Blast publication of Gods and Services.
And what a fun theme. I mean, that theme itself was inspiring enough to make me write the first short story I've written since high school.
I love the theme, but I actually stole the theme. All the themes out there have been used and reused. But the idea of Pedersen services came from an old Tony Randall and Barbara Eden movie called The Brass Bottle, where Tony Randall ends up with a brass bottle, and when he uncorks it, out pops Burl Ives, who's a genie, and he insists on making Tony Randall's life better because he's done him this favor. And no matter how much Tony Randall is saying, no, please leave me alone, my life is just fine, you're making things worse, the genie feels duty-bound, he's going to do it anyway. And this actually came out before I Dream of Jeannie and inspired the series, but it was...
neat.
It was
I love that.
And it just got me thinking, well, what if, people could have an ancient god enter their life, and this god, felt duty-bound to help them or do something for them, in this instance because he's been purchased or rented or paid for.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it was a great idea, and I really enjoyed writing the story, and it was a good exercise for me. I have a hard time writing something that's under 100,000 words, and, which sounds crazy, but I mean, I'm a writer.
Well, I have a problem breaking the 20,000 word limit. Once I get past there, I'm okay, but it's like the sound barrier, the wings start to fall off if it's not.
Yeah, I get it.
So where are you going from here? I mean, you've got the 5th Angst book ready to go. You've got the children's novel. You've got the short story in Gods and Services. Are you going on vacation now, retiring, Disneyland? I don't know.
Well, a lot of times after I get done writing a book, I spend a lot of time marketing it. I go to conventions, and during that time I do my brainstorming. I do have some ideas for some other stories that I'm going to tackle before I may come back to Angst at some point in time, but for right now, I've got some pretty solid things that I think would be a lot of fun to write, and I think my readers would enjoy. But even before that, don't tell anybody because it'll make me stick to this, but I'm going to try to get in a little bit better shape.
You do like
oh, shoot. Well, as you know, I've got Parkinson's disease, and a big part of to keep it from progressing, or I guess to help with some of the tremors and other issues that you get, exercise is a very big part of that. Well, when I'm busy writing with my butt in a chair writing books, I don't have a lot of time to exercise. So I'm going to see if I can reacquaint myself with fitness again for a couple months before I really dive into anything.
Have you thought about carrying around a 150-pound sword?
That would help. I think that would be considered exercise.
That was something else I wanted to ask you about, and I never really got to it. But throughout Angst, there are these magical talismans, and they are giant swords. Why were they giant swords?
I don't know. I think I at the time that I wrote it, it was kind of like I thought that would be funny, because it's so impractical, and it's so larger than life, but it was also kind of frightening. Everybody thought it was a statue, and then he goes and picks it up, and they're like, oh, well, maybe it's not a statue. Yeah. And I just kind of like how that felt, and this is a guy that's been kind of picked on all of his life for wielding magic, which is illegal, and now he's carrying around this big giant sword that's bigger than him, and it kind of compensates for that a little bit.
Yeah, it was very much the sword in the stone, except it was the sword that was stone.
And I drew from that a little bit. One of my favorite things to do with my books, and I'm sure you noticed this in the short story I wrote for the Gods and Services, is I love cultural literacy. I love referring to just gentle little referrals to other stories, other movies, and I kind of try to sneak something into each of my books that refers to something. It doesn't even have to be something modern. It can be something older like A Sword in a Stone. And in the first book, I even say, they use that sword as a way to haze, as a hazing ritual. Anybody that can pick it up gets to be a knight. And later the queen says, well, just, you can't become a knight by picking up a sword like it's a sword in the stone. So.
Oh, yeah, because that would not be a valid method of selecting knights.
Indeed.
All right, well, David, it has been a real pleasure having you here on the show, and I can't wait to see you again at convention. I definitely need to delve into the 5th book, and for those who don't know the title yet, we are going to be revealing it in the article that is embedding this YouTube video as well as our anchor podcast, the Critical Podblast. So you'll definitely have to come over to criticalblast.com to see the cover and see the title.
Thank you very much for having me, and I really appreciate you sharing that with everybody and all of your viewers.
Well, we appreciate you premiering it on our site, and we can't wait to have everyone come in and see what it's going to be, and to then go out and buy the book. When is it going to be available on Amazon for purchase?
It'll be available mid-January.
Well, we will. That's only a couple of weeks. Gosh, we will be.
Yeah,
we will
almost there.
orders.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. We'll talk to you later.
Every 2,000 years, the elements go to war on Erd. The winner is awarded the prize, which allows that element to shape the world to their liking. Magic is the final element standing, and his vision of Erd has no room for humans. After months of mourning, Angst concludes that picking up his giant magical sword, Chrysalis, had triggered the element war. The only way to save everyone is to claim the prize and stop himself from ever wielding the sword. Convinced this will kill Angst and destroy Erd, his friends vow to stop him at all costs. The only one willing to help Angst is also the most notorious criminal in Unsel, Victoria's younger cousin, Aloria. The beautiful teen princess can outdrink, outparty, and outflirt Angst. Is she his perfect companion, or his perfect foil? On the run from his friends, his foes, and every nation on Erd, Angst races magic to win the one thing that could save everyone he loves. Join Angst and his friends on his final adventure. Dying with Angst, a novel by David J. Pedersen.